Hi, my name's Rob, and I will be talking about Bill C230, an act respecting the development of a national strategy to redress environmental racism, as well as some of the problems of the bill and some of the benefits of the bill. And I will also say that I'm a white settler, so it is important to find other opinions, specifically of people experiencing environmental racism. One of the issues is environmental racism is not defined in Bill C230, which is a problem because definitions play a critical role in legislation. There's also a 2-year timeline for the Minister of Environment of Canada to create a national strategy. And it's, in quotes, national strategy to promote efforts across Canada to redress the harm caused by environmental racism. 2 years is a long time, and then 5 years after that, in one of the section. So these reports need to come more quickly than that, because we already know that environmental racism is an issue. And I believe that reports on environmental racism can be useful because of highlighting inequalities in society and potential solutions to those inequalities. But that only works if the reports have action attached to it. There has been a history of reports sitting on shelves gathering dust and no action being taken to follow up on it. And it looks like there's going to be statistics and maps which are useful in demonstrating where environmental racism exists. And we know that it exists because reports have been done on it, environmental racism. And another thing is that there's no mention of, at least I didn't see it, no mention of access to court and addressing the high cost of going to court on environmental issues. Section 3 of this act says, and these are quotes directly from the act, directly from the bill, I don't believe it's passed. The strategy must include measures to A, examine the link between waste, social economic status, and environmental risk. B, collect information and statistics relating to the location of environmental hazards. C, collect information and statistics relating to negative health outcomes in communities that have been affected by environmental racism. D, assess the administration and enforcement of environmental laws in each province. And E, address environmental racism, including in relation to I, possible amendments to federal laws, policy, and programs. II, the involvement of community groups in environmental policy making. compensation for individuals or communities, IV, ongoing funding for effective communities, and V, access of affected communities to clean air and water. And we know that a lot of indigenous communities don't have access to clean water, despite being, in some cases, being next door to communities with access to clean drinking water. Like Cove Lake is an example. And then at this point, you might want to know what the definition of environmental justice is. I found in the Environmental Justice in Toronto report that environmental justice is the principle that all people, regardless of gender, age, race, or socio-economic status, are entitled to equal protection under environmental laws and to participate in environmental decision-making in the community. And that's also from Menace and Jordan, 2005, page 245, and I found this on page 2 of the report. And quote, environmental injustice occur when a certain minority of the population is forced through the lack of access to decision-making and policy-making processes to live with a disproportionate share of environmental bads and suffer the related public health problems and quality of life burdens. Eggman, Bullard, and Evans, 2003, page 6. And that was also from the same report. And Dr. Robert Bullard's research showed that incinerators and landfills have not been located have been located in predominantly black neighborhoods, which is shown in several news articles about his work. He's considered the father of environmental justice. Currently, several First Nations communities lack access to clean drinking water, which is problematic for COVID-19 prevention, because washing hands is one way to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And that's part of environmental racism. I have made an earlier episode of Environmental Soup on SoundCloud, which talks about a little bit about environmental racism, specifically Dr. Robert Bullard's work. In multiple resource projects, including the Coastal GasLink pipeline and Trans Mountain pipeline, the traditional governments and individual First Nations were ignored, and there was inadequate consultations with no ability for First Nations to say no to the projects, despite there being significant harm to Indigenous culture. And consultation, we have to move beyond consultations. That's just step one. Without having an ability to say no to a project, it's not really, can it really be considered consultation? And an article quote, environmental racism in Canada. What is it? What are the impacts and what can we do about it? By Dr. Elaine McDonald. It is revealed that the Mjingwong First Nation is particularly impacted by Chemical Valley in Sonia. A quote from the article says, quote, there is strong evidence that pollution is causing adverse health effects, which neither the federal nor provincial government have properly investigated, end quote. The article also mentions Africville in Nova Scotia, which was used as a dumping ground. Mercury contamination in grassy narrows has not been cleaned up since the 1970s, impacting a First Nation for over 50 years. And a report called Environmental Justice in Toronto by Melissa Olivo and Erica Singh in 2007 talked about environmental racism, specifically in Toronto, citing examples of Canada Metal Company, industry close to communities of low income, recent immigrants. In terms of waste, it has been shipped to Greenland landfill in southwestern Ontario, where, quote, members of the Oneida Native Reserve have been vocal in their opposition, end quote. Environmental justice was also linked to housing, which raises good points about housing and environmental justice. And this is related to poorly maintained homes in low-income neighborhoods, where there is a higher percentage of racialized individuals and low-income individuals. They talked about inadequate waste collection, which leads to insect infestations, poor ventilation, which leads to air quality issues, and I guess that flooding should also be added due to basement rentals. And there's another quote, high proportions of the visible minority population, recent immigrant populations, and low medium income populations are located in close proximity to high emission facilities in Toronto, end quote. If this report is simply used to show environmental racism exists in Canada, I don't believe that it will be successful because we already know this. But if it builds on the work and empowers communities, I believe that Bill C230 can be successful, especially if action is followed up on. But I also believe that there should be amendments so that the reports come more often and not every 2 years or every 5 years, because it should be these issues should be addressed in the same government before the government changes and everything has to start over. Yeah, and that's what there was probably more to say on this. I know that there was more to say on this. So I'll likely make another video on this topic. And thank you for listening.